time for me to wish you all good morning and to welcome you to the June 27th program of Spiritual Enrichment at Winnetka Congregational Church. And today's speaker is none other than our senior pastor, Jeff Braun. And without further ado, I hand it over to Jeff.
Thank you, JS, very much. And it is a pleasure to be here this morning. As I had said to JS in our everybody online part of the Zoom call, I said, or an earlier call, I said, now, watching this film just gave me the excuse to cry all over again. So if I happen to, have tears well up as we're talking about the film or watching these clips I've found to share with you, so be it. It was one of those films back when I first saw it, and it will certainly always be that kind of film. A little bit of background. I saw this first with a very dear friend in college. I graduated in 1990. This was, I think, just after we had graduated. And this was not but maybe a month and a half, 2 months after my maternal grandfather had died. Someone I was very close to, and who in kind of physical features and less in his big personality kind of reminded me of one of the key characters in this film, Alfredo. So I want to share some clips with you and have done my best to excerpt ones that both can tell really the full arc of the story to remind you all who have seen it of what that arc is. And if you haven't seen it, it won't so tell the story that you feel like you don't have to watch the whole film. And just to use those as ways to touch on how beautifully the filmmaking was done, how poignant I think the human insight was, and to evoke, as we watch these excerpts, the incredible richness and sometimes the great difficulty, but always the joy and the beauty of human experience. So the first clip, and I'm going to do my best to share my screen here. You tell me if you can see it. Can you all see that?
Yes.
All right. So the first clip here is of this is really the establishing shot. This is like, there's nothing fancy about this filmmaking, but it's so elemental that it feels like it is a much bigger production value than it actually is filmmaking wise. And it just draws you in. And I think that's one of this film's most powerful features. It is utterly inviting, magnetic, and atmospheric. You feel as if you have crossed through these windows. You can feel the breeze coming off the Mediterranean, and you've entered into a life, a time, a space that, while not yours, invites you to be utterly in it, not just as voyeur. And I found that kind of experiential, I can be in the orb with the characters themselves kind of feeling really a powerful and differentiating feature about this film. And it amplified the messages that I think the film communicated. So here's the opening shot. This is where the aged mother of Toto, or Salvatore, as his full name is trying to reach Salvatore. She is in Sicily, still has been all these years, and he has long since been 30 years or so been in Rome and has not visited in those 30 years. So here's the establishing shot. And it's very revealing about the mother's psychology, about loss, and it plays out later in the film as well. And it's very revealing about kind of how she views life and how love has a hold of her, helps her both to see things and sometimes to blind her to things. Here is this first clip. So a very powerful scene with the mother, and there's that statement where she says, you know, he'll remember. I know him better than you, and that's the daughter, the grown daughter, Salvatore's sister, that was talking there and saying, you know, he won't remember. You know him. He's very busy. And then there's this interaction with what I believe to be the, you know, fairly long-standing love relationship, wife of Salvatore, and you hear that the mother is constantly confusing her for other people, and when it's always her. And his reaction when she says someone died, someone named Alfredo, and how you just see his whole being shift. And I found it to be so poignant because there are those times when something is said and emotions that are tectonically deep are brought to the surface. Fault lines that seem dormant are activated, and they really become floodgates. And that's what happened for him. And so through the beauty of the film, that moment of him being almost re-haunted by long dormant memories and the connection back to his home, to this person we know nothing about yet named Alfredo, they use this image of him on the pillow in this very sort of ghostly light with the storm in the background. And you can see sort of, not in the blankness, but in the fullness of his eyes, how the reel of his life, his earlier life, is playing in his heart and mind. I think that's what happens to us in life. Sometimes things just reboot deep wells of memory. And the filmmakers use this, they cut back to this image of him on the pillow. It's just absolutely exquisite. And you see like, oh my gosh, this is all playing out in him. So we're literally in his mind and heart as much as we're watching on this screen some portrayal of it. So it's just a beautiful technique there. And you see this person, Alfredo, is someone who's very, very important.
Can I ask a question for somebody who maybe has seen the movie? I just watched it last night.
Oh,
and
wow.
because I was gonna listen to today, and I wanted to know, is the woman that he comes home to at the beginning of the movie in the hotel room, Jeff, you said that was his wife?
Well, I looked at her finger. She did not have a ring on, but what, at a minimum, I kind of read it that way. I believe that this is someone he's been with for a long time, and the mom keeps calling and saying, you know, as we find out later in the film, oh, it's never the same woman. It's always a different woman. And she's projecting this non-settled, life not quite yet settled image onto him as a way to emotionally understand why he hasn't come back to visit her.
I see, but you think this was a woman he's been with a long time. I couldn't, and I didn't know if at the end it was the same woman that he had fallen in love with as a teenager, because there was a flash at the very end of the movie,
yeah,
of her, and so I was a little confused, but anyway.
Yeah, no, that one is, that's not, I believe that ended. That was,
yeah.
That went into the abyss, and he never saw her, and that kind of ended in a difficult way, and his heart was broken. But that was his first love. that was almost a film within a film, that
Right.
whole courting of that young woman, and how he would wait outside her window for all these consecutive nights, and finally they connect and they share a kiss, actually in the projection booth of Cinema Paradiso. So that was not the same woman, though.
Okay.
So what I loved about the film, it's a very exquisite film. It's so well done. So for those that haven't seen it, just a few comments, and then I'll tell you, kind of segue into what it Toto is this young boy, and his father, his mother's husband, does not come home from World War II. And this is an important subtext or kind of a thread, foundational thread through the whole film. So he's fatherless. He's been, orphaned, at least in a paternal sense. The mother does not want to admit that he's not coming home. So she, again, her love is both something that gives her keen insight, and it's also knowing how broken she would be, how unready she was to accept it, how it blinds her. And she projects what she needs to see, almost like a subconscious coping mechanism, onto the screen of the life in the world around her. And I think there's a beauty in that, that our hearts sometimes know what we are ready to embrace and what we're not yet ready to embrace. And our heart, at the very same time, in a very foibled way, looking at it in a different lens, can sometimes prevent us from seeing what we might need to come to terms with. And I think that's a thread through this whole film. And it's just so artfully done, so subtly done, as you might expect from an art house film from Europe. It's just very tastefully done. And it evoked in me that sense of how sometimes something's down inside you. There's a grief, or there's a joy, or there's a hope, or there's a broken dream, and sometimes you're ready to let that surface and come to terms with it, and other times you just can't. And it's not that you are completely ignorant, it's just your heart's kind of negotiating, sometimes working against you maybe a little, but usually protecting you, and this powerful filter of the human heart. There's a relationship that develops because of the absence of the biological father with this older man, Alfredo. He runs the projector booth in the local cinema. And of course, it started before Toto was born, where he was literally cranking the film, and saying how people would get angry if he got tired and started to go too slow. But now it's an automated projector, and he's up there manning it. And there are several scenes that were very powerful, where the relationship is forming, and you see them negotiating their relationship. This little boy who is so world wise. I mean, he is just so smart, and able to read the room. I mean, his EQ is off the charts. And this older gentleman, this kind of grizzled older gentleman, who considers himself to be not much. He said, "I'm just a nitwit running a booth. I'm nothing." And he and Toto negotiate this relationship. And the way that they do this is so beautiful. And to me, it speaks to how intergenerational relationships, especially when many decades are between them, can be negotiated in that way. And there are moments when you look at the film and these interactions, particularly early on, when they're kind of seeing who they are together, and how will they come together as friends, and eventually as kind of father-son, proxy father and proxy son. They act like they're the opposite of what they are sometimes. Like sometimes Alfredo is the boy, this grown man, and sometimes Toto is the grown adult, and he's the one who's like running the relationship and figuring things out. And I just love that when you are in a relationship with someone, be it a family member or a friend or a mentor, that there are ways in which you can be utterly your age and be the beneficiary of the other person's age. And there are moments sometimes when wisdom and love and insight can catapult you into the leaderly position where you're the one who's perhaps providing the care and the guidance. Or as old as you are, as wise as you are, Alfredo was very wise and deeply loving, and had so much joy to give, but always questioned in the beginning, like whether anybody would value it. Sometimes he became the boy. And I love that dynamic, and I've experienced that in my life, and it just seems so natural. They didn't, soften the edges. There are a couple moments when they're like almost like cursing at each other, and Toto's running away, did something Alfredo didn't like, and Alfredo's like, "You will never come back up into the projection room again." And there's this loud crowd out on the square, and Toto's running across, and he goes, "Alfredo, Alfredo," and he goes, "Oh yes," and he's expecting something wonderful, and he goes, "Up yours, Alfredo." It's just this wonderful, like, wait, who's in charge here? So I loved that interplay. And I love the way, so to kind of flash forward a little bit, I love the way that the film picked up pieces of life, deep, important pieces that seem like remnants, like literally parts cut out of the film, which is what Alfredo was constantly doing, especially the request of the local priest. The priest would preview all the films, and he'd have a little bell, and there'd be anything remotely involving a romance scene or a kissing scene, and he'd go, "No!" And he would shake his bell, and Alfredo would have to stop the film and cut out the kissing scene and put it in a big pile. And you see there's a giant pile of all of these, deleted kissing scenes. And I think in our life, there are things that we edit out. There are things that we set aside. There are things that we say, well, we'll come back to that. And Alfredo said that. He said to Toto, "You cannot have these because these need to be put back into the films." And he's like, "You mean like all of these you didn't put back?" And he's like, "Well, sometimes life gets in the way." And the way we edit without even knowing it, or the way life kind of edits for us, sometimes causes us to change our focus and lose sight of things. And this film so beautifully points out how that happens, so we can be aware of it, whether we choose it, whether it's subconscious or it's an outside force, and shows that the way they resolve the film, especially in the final scene, shows that you can go back and you can gather up these remnants, and you can be touched by them again, that they can kind of come to life and come to coherence even after long, long pauses, maybe even decades long. And that life is constantly being edited and excerpted and kind of refocused or coming out of focus. And so the whole metaphor of the projection booth and the editor in the booth and what happens in the lives of those who are in the film just kind of spoke to life in such a Missouri State, show me, don't tell me kind of way. And I really appreciated that, because I think it spoke to human nature without holding it right up in front of you like an American action film, which is just so like, of course they're going to shoot the machine gun. Of course they're going to get punched in the face. It wasn't obvious, and it wasn't syrupy. And I just felt, as I was watching the film, not long after my grandfather had died, a very other fatherly figure to me, grandfatherly figure, like the wisdom I had learned from him, and that this film helps to point so gently to and recohere in our hearts, our minds, our consciousness, was just welling up in me, like the tears of the main character well up in his eyes so many times during the film, as you see Toto, especially as the now Salvatore, the older man on the pillow, having these emotions. When he finally goes back to Sicily, Alfredo, again, having died, he goes back for the funeral and having all these moments where it's overwhelming for him to be back. And yet there's also a coming to some sense of a new peace. So these are some of the things that just moved me about the film. Before I talk about the last scene, which is the most, I think, I choke up talking about it. I love that scene. Such a beautiful scene. Such a gorgeous human scene. Before I talk about that, so I can recover from my own self-induced tears, any questions that you might have, or any thoughts if you've seen the film, or anything about what I've said, because I want to pause for a moment and promote conversation. Andrea.
I just was wondering, why do you think that Alfredo was so insistent that he not come back? He pushed him away, not pushed him literally, but figuratively, he said, "Don't come back." And he was a teenager. Toto was a teenager then. And he vicariously, I think, wanted to live a different life through Toto, or at least give Toto the life that he thought he had potential for. But I thought it was a pretty strong declaration or request not to come back.
Yeah.
Because Toto took it kind of literally, and
he did. You know,
it was kind of harsh.
So there's this scene that Andrea is so beautifully pointing to, and that was one of the ones I was going to show. And they show these, again, it's simple filmmaking. They show two pieces of luggage, and you hear the bell that's saying the train is coming, and then they show hands around someone's back, and these are the hands of Toto. Now I guess he's not quite yet Salvatore, the older man, but it's Toto hugging the back of his sister, hugging the back of his mom, and then you see him walk over to Alfredo. And Alfredo is sitting, and he's been blinded now because there was a fire in the projection booth, and it was Toto who goes back up into the burning building, the only one, the boy, not the boy, right? The courageous young man in a way, but still a physical boy, and he drags Alfredo down the stairs, where then others were able to help him. So he's blinded by this, and Toto, of course, took over the projection booth. The mantle has passed. And all the while, Alfredo was saying, "You can't stay. This is not for you. There's a bigger light for you." And I know this. Just I know this. I see what you can't see, even more now that I'm blind. So Toto goes over to Alfredo at the train station, and he kind of draws in a bracing breath. Alfredo does, and he grabs Toto by the head, and their faces are literally this close. Their foreheads are touching, and he says, "Don't ever come back. You go and you don't look back. And if you come back, don't look me up. You are meant for another life. You have to go. You must go. Don't come back here." And I think, Andrea, I think it is a both and scene. I think there was an utter charity of heart. He did not want Toto to get caught in this village, which could be kind of a magnet, lost in time out of time kind of place, knowing there was a future. Didn't want nostalgia to hold him prisoner. And so he basically said, in a way, rejecting or spurning Toto so as to free him, like the one person you're closest to here is me, and I won't allow you to come into my home if you come back. And I think it was a gift of love. It was, and then at the end, when he's done saying it, you could tell how much he hated saying it, because his hands relax, and he's like, "Okay, I said it." And then he's just both full of love and sad that now Toto's leaving. So I think it was a great self-sacrificing gift, and it was a bracing, almost harsh moment, but for a purpose. And I think he knew. Remember that line when the mother says to her daughter and Toto's sister in the opening scene, "Well, I know him better than you." I think Alfredo knew Toto's heart, and he knew that he would have stayed and maybe been caught there. So I thought it was a gift, ultimately, however harsh it might have come across, and allowed him to then go have this life and yet not be able to escape. This was the other thing I loved about the film. Another thing is that you can't escape your past. You can't escape deep wells of memory. You can't escape emotions that formed you, even if you might want to move on or be distracted.
Thing about work, like,
so that scene was so important. Any other questions? And by the way, Jess, what is our end time? I want to make sure we end on time. I want to make sure I'm not going past that. Are we at 40 or 45?
I think it's been 40.
40? Okay. So let me jump to the final scene. So the final scene, raise your hand again if you've seen the film. All right, so the final scene is, there are kind of two scenes. There's a conversation that's a very reconciling, but not all resolving conversation with mother and son, now much older mother and son. And the mother's basically saying, it's good you didn't come back. And if you felt guilty over the years, you didn't need to. I think you did the right thing. And so now this mother figure that was kind of absent because she was so embroiled in her own pain communicates that she's been loving him from afar and supporting him since he left. And this albatross falls from his neck. And now his mother and his father, right, are formative for him. His father figure, Alfredo, has died, and his mother kind of steps back in. It's just beautiful the way she fills that void. and he flies back to Rome, and then he goes into he's a huge film executive now, and he's walking into his screening room. He's the only one in it. And he hands this very kind of smoky, fire damaged film case, film reel, over to someone and says, just roll it when I say we're ready. And they roll it.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I found it on YouTube. Do you want me to try and bring it up?
If you can find that, yes, that would be great. And then so let me set up the last thing. So the scene is all the remnant pieces, all the deep joys, all the things that just had been kind of only in his mind and in that projection room, and that the priest tried, the society tries, the world tries, the hardships of life try to kind of sublimate. They all erupt on the screen in front of Alfredo, and what he sees is a film in front of Toto, sorry. What he sees is a pastiching and editing together of all these clips that had been taken out. He had made a reel for Toto.
Controlli le giunte. Appena è pronto può partire.
Va bene, dottor. E complimenti per il film, è gagliardissimo.
Grazie.
It just, if you watch the film, it was utterly unexpected. And it just, to me, says, the lost pieces are never lost. And they're drawn up in this gorgeous way, and sometimes not so obviously, but that love is irrepressible, and it arcs back and it finds us. And it was just,
think the loss of my dad as well is moving through me, but I loved what the film did, because it just said, in the end, all that was pushed aside, all that we thought was, had fallen away, can come back to us in this graceful way. And this man is now made a boy again, and the magic of cinema that I think has somehow been lost. He's become an executive and it's a business. He's just lost again in the power of not just the movie, the power of cinema, but the power of life. And this kiss from Alfredo on the top of his head, just right at the end of the film, is exquisite. And I could theologize about the film as well, because I think there's so many ways it speaks to God's love, but certainly human experience, the well of emotion, love's irrepressibility. Those just seem to be such beautiful themes.
Thank you very much, Jeff.